những người này họ phía bên dân chủ á mọi người, họ đang lên để họ bỏ phiếu để họ rút phế tổng thống Trump. Sau khi họ bỏ phiếu á, thì họ sẽ gửi những cái phiếu của họ tới cho thượng viện.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Arizona. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 2 minutes. It is with wariness and a certain unhealthy, morbid curiosity that I watched the
Những người này đang đứng lên đây từng người một nói là lý do tại sao phải làm như vậy, thì đa số những người ở bên dân chủ họ sẽ phản đối những gì tổng thống Trump đã làm, nhưng mà có một số người phía Cộng hòa thì họ đứng lên họ bênh vực cho tổng thống Trump. Em chào anh Cường.
Your craving was never a Biden victory, nor was it even a Trump defeat. You believe that your hunger will be finally satiated by impeaching this president without completion of his full term of office. You don't merely seek victory, but you seek obliteration of your nemesis. The thirst for Trump's destruction will not be slaked, however, even if you're successful today and were the Senate to convict President Trump. Yours will be a Pyrrhic victory, for instead of stopping the Trump train, his movement will grow stronger, for you will have made him.
Thì hồi bữa tổng thống Trump ông đã lên ông nói là ông không có nhận trách nhiệm về những cái cuộc mà người ta đi vào trong cái tòa nhà Quốc hội. Ông không có nhận, tại vì ông nói là ông không có xúi người ta làm chuyện đó. Ông chỉ nói người ta đi xuống biểu tình ôn hòa thôi. Hôm thứ Ba ông đã nói như vậy, và ông đã bảo vệ chính mình, và ông nói là mọi người nghĩ những gì tôi nói là hoàn toàn phù hợp. Và ông tổng thống Trump ông cũng nói là cái việc luận tội mà mọi người đang là cố làm đó thì nó chỉ có gây ra cái mối nguy hiểm to lớn cho đất nước thôi. Và nếu mà người ta làm như vậy thì nó sẽ gây ra cái sự tức giận rất là to lớn. Ông này đang đứng lên để bênh vực cho tổng thống, là nói là tổng thống Trump đã làm được rất là nhiều thứ.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized. And to speak right now, yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff. The gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute. 1 week ago, the president incited an insurrection against Congress to prevent the peaceful transition of power. It was the most dangerous moment for our democracy in a century. Today, we invoke the remedy the founders provided for just such a lawless president. More important, today we begin the long road to restoration.
Ông này là người thuộc đảng Dân Chủ ở California.
Great Depression, pandemics, McCarthyism, and now a Trumpist and white nationalist insurrection. And yet our democracy endures. It endures because at every juncture, every pivotal moment, when evil threatened to overtake good, patriotic Americans step forward to say enough. This is one of those moments. To preserve this sacred place, this citadel of democracy for ourselves and for posterity, let us say enough. Enough. I yield back. Back the gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas. Go. The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes. Here's a quote. I just don't even know why there aren't more uprisings all over the country, and maybe there will be.
Cái màn hình nó chiếu chứ mình đang ngồi ở ngoài nha, chọc ngoài trường. Ông này của đảng Cộng hòa thuộc tiểu bang Texas.
We were called enemies of the state. Those are all quotes from our speaker. Now, on our side, we didn't take those to be impeachable because we didn't believe she surely meant that. But by the Democrats taking this action, you're telling me, no, when we say those, we actually mean to incite violence. That's what this action is saying. Look, I just looked on the History Channel. It says these words, if the Judiciary Committee, talking about impeachment, finds sufficient grounds, its members write and pass articles of impeachment, which then go to the full House for a vote. Half of all the impeachments ever conducted, ever voted for, occurred under this speaker. You're setting a precedent that says very clearly that this impeachment ain't going to work, but it is setting the precedent. Unlike a year ago when we said, look, it shouldn't go through Intel, it should go through the Judiciary Committee. Forget that. Now the message is, if you have a whim and you want to just go after a president, just go straight to the floor. No investigation, no Judiciary Committee, go straight to the floor. Use it as a political weapon as you wish. This is so dangerous, what you're doing. Forgetting all the precedents, yes, we can argue back and forth, but you're using this as a weapon. And you're destroying this little experiment self-government in a year's time.
Ủa vậy hả Trường?
I yield back.
The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is
Madam
recognized.
Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Massachusetts, Ms. Clark.
The gentlewoman from Massachusetts is recognized for 1 minute. Suffragist and abolitionist Lucy Stone stated, if we speak the truth fearlessly, we shall add to our number those who will turn the scale to
Thêm
the
một người
side
nữa ở
of
phía
people
bên đảng Dân
and
Chủ,
full
bà này thuộc tiểu bang
justice in all
Massachusetts.
things. The truth is, President Trump incited a violent attack against the United States government. The truth is, President Trump spent his presidency inflaming hate, white supremacy, anti-Semitism, and violence. The truth is, he was enabled by all those who perpetuated the lie that the most secure election in our nation's history was stolen. The truth is that these seditious actions left 5 dead, our capital besieged, our security threatened, and our democracy hanging in the balance. And the truth is,
Bà đang lên bà kể tội Tổng thống Trump á. Bà nói ổng là
that the government of the people,
gây ra
by
cái
the
vụ
people, for the people, shall not
kêu gọi những người
perish
biểu
from the
tình
earth.
rồi gây ra những cái mà phân biệt chủng tộc. Nói chung là những người mà thượng đẳng da trắng.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The last speaker said that for 4 years, the president did all these terrible, insightful things, including anti-Semitism. I take exception with that, but I think it's important that we embrace one thing that was said. Yes, the president has been consistent for the last 4 years. During his campaign, I even, representing another candidate, said that the president had political Tourette's. He said what was on his mind without a filter.
Ông Trump ông nói là nếu mà người ta cứ làm luận tội như vậy á, thì nó sẽ gây ra cái mối nguy hiểm rất là to lớn cho đất nước. Và nó làm cho những người dân mà ủng hộ ông á, thì họ sẽ tức giận. Và một số thành viên trong đảng Cộng Hòa thì họ nói là Tổng thống Trump sẽ học được một bài học về cái cách mà kiềm chế hành vi của mình sau cái cuộc luận tội đầu tiên. Thì những nhà lập pháp khác của đảng Cộng Hòa họ đã đưa ra cái kết luận trong tuần này và họ nói là không thể tin tưởng nổi là ông ta phải chịu trách nhiệm về cái hành động của mình. Những người bên đảng Cộng Hòa mà người ta không có đồng ý với Tổng thống Trump á. Con chào cô Hà.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in my last floor speech in this body to do what I was sworn to do on the first day, to protect and defend the Constitution. President Trump put the domestic terrorists on notice by saying, stand back and stand by. He then summoned them to D.C., directed them to march on the Capitol, and then he sat back and watched the insurrection. Some of my colleagues, some of which
Thêm một ông nữa của đảng Dân Chủ.
In their latest attempt to placate and please this unfit president, suggest that we should punish Trump for his actions in order to unify the country. That is the climax of foolishness. Let me suggest to them, stand up, man up, woman up, and defend this Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic, including Donald J. Trump. In the first
Hồi nãy có bà
impeachment,
policy nha,
said
Nhân
we
Nguyễn.
didn't need to impeach him because he learned his lesson. So no need to remove him. Well, we said
Mọi người này đang lên đây muốn nói đưa ra những cái này cái kia để nói chung là để chuất phế ông.
Richmond out.
Gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
You have 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Arizona, Ms. Lesko.
The gentlewoman from Arizona is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in opposition to the resolution. At a time when our country needs unity, it is concerning that my Democratic colleagues have chosen to begin impeachment proceedings against a president with just 7 days left in office. All legal challenges have been exhausted. Congress has certified electors over objections.
Bà này thì lên kêu gọi đoàn kết, là bà nói là bà phản đối cái vụ chuất phế này tại vì ông chỉ còn có 7 ngày nữa là hết nhiệm kỳ của ông rồi.
So why pursue impeachment just 1 week before he leaves office? I've heard my colleagues
Tại sao lại làm chuyện đó trong khi đó ông chỉ còn có 7 ngày nữa, chỉ còn có 1 tuần nữa để ở trong Nhà Trắng thôi.
Yet they know that it is impossible for the Senate to remove him before his term expires. So what is the point? This move sets a dangerous precedent for our nation. If Congress is going to impeach a president, it must not only be done after intense debate and deliberation, not rushed through in the 11th hour to make a political point. This impeachment attempt is dangerous for our country and has far-reaching implications for our future. And with that, Madam Speaker, I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from New York, Mr. Jeffrey.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I did not come to Congress to impeach Donald Trump, but the constitutional crimes by an out-of-control president inspired by his hatred and the big lie that he told cannot be ignored. Donald Trump is a living, breathing, impeachable offense. It is what it is. The violent attack on the U.S. Capitol was an act of insurrection incited by Donald Trump. He is a clear and present danger to the health, safety and well-being of the American.
Ông này ông nói là ông không có muốn đứng đây để đưa ra những cái chuất phế hay luận tội tổng thống, mà chính tổng thống đã gây ra những cái nguy hiểm đó.
Violence will not win. Insurrection will not win. Sedition will not win. Terror will not win. Lawlessness will not win. Mob rule will not win. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Democracy will
The
prevail.
gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, we reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Aguilar.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Người dân biểu khác ở California.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On January 3rd, we stood here on this floor and swore an oath to defend our Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic. 3 days later, that oath was put to the test when a violent mob tried to break down those doors to stop us from performing our constitutional duty. This mob was not without a leader. On that day, the president told them to walk to this Capitol.
Đang đứng kể tội những người biểu tình ngày đó, tổng thống kêu người ta đi lại cái tòa nhà Quốc hội.
Many of which I've heard on this floor the last week. He needed to say only 2 words to end the violence. I concede. Because that's what leaders do in a democracy. Because that's what we do in the United States. They put politics aside
and put country first. And as I look to our colleagues over on the other side, I wonder how many of them will demonstrate that leadership and join us in holding President Trump accountable for inciting this deadly attack. How many will uphold our oath and put our country first to defend this Constitution from the threat in the White House? To do anything less is to turn your back on the oath altogether. Thank you. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, we continue to reserve.
Gentleman from Ohio continues to reserve. The gentleman from New York is
Madam
recognized.
Speaker, I now yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Cicilline.
The gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Cicilline, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Madam Speaker, for more than 220 years since George Washington yielded the
Thêm một ông này ở tiểu bang Rhode Island.
peaceful transfer of power has been a hallmark of our democracy. In this country, the will of the American people reigns supreme over the ambitions of any individual. Every single president has honored and upheld these principles until now. Donald Trump lost his bid for re-election last November. It was a free and fair election. In fact, President Trump's own election security director called it the most secure election in U.S. history. But for 2 months now, Donald Trump has refused to accept the will of the American people. Over and over again, he's told his supporters he didn't really lose. The election was stolen from him and from them. And as they grew angrier and angrier over this perceived injustice, he told them there was still a way to keep him in power. So is Congress prepared to meet for the sacred ritual of certifying the results of the presidential election?
Ông đang nói là ông Trump không có giống như những đời tổng thống khác là không có đồng ý với những cái gì mà người ta giống như là không có chấp nhận đó.
We will never give up. We will never concede, he told them. You don't fight like hell, he warned, you're not going to have a country anymore. The people on the ellipse that day heard his message loud and clear. They answered his call for insurrection. As the third-ranking Republican in this chamber put it, he summoned the mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of this attack. Armed with guns, pipe bombs, bats, shields, zip ties, and more, they set their sights on the U.S. Capitol. They stormed the citadel of our democracy. Hundreds of domestic terrorists did what Donald Trump wanted them to do. They seized the Capitol and tried to end our country's 234-year experiment in democracy. As the Trump family and White House aides watched gleefully on television, they searched the halls of this building for the vice president, who they came to hang for treason.
Đang nói những người biểu tình hồi bữa đã tràn vào tòa nhà Quốc hội và làm những cái việc hành động mà.
The terrorists who stormed this building planned to hang the vice president, kill the speaker, and topple our government. They took down the American flag and replaced it with a Trump flag. I asked my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, who are not planning to vote for this article, is this the kind of country you want to live in? What are you going to tell your children and grandchildren when they ask what you did in this moment? Did you stand for the Republic or for this president? Heed the words of Abraham Lincoln, the first Republican president, who told our country that a house divided against itself cannot stand. This great house in which he served cannot and will not endure if we do not stand together now. The president and the terrorists who stormed these halls last Wednesday did not succeed in toppling our republic. We must ensure they never do. I implore you, join us in supporting this article, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves his time. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Van Drew.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 1 minute.
We've been here before. We've done this before. This has failed before. We fractured our nation using the same process before.
Ông này đang lên nói là đã từng làm những cái chuyện này nhưng mà không thành công.
This process would conclude, the man they want out of office will no longer even be the president. If we want unity, this is not the way. America was and is the leading light in the world. This proceeding has continued to cloak our nation in darkness. Nearly half the country supports our current president. This takes their voice away.
Ông nói là khi mọi người cứ làm cái này á, thì cái người mà họ muốn trích vé là cũng không có, giống như là không còn đủ thời gian để làm nữa, không có đủ thời gian để thực hiện nữa.
I yield back.
Ông nói là gần một nửa nước Mỹ ủng hộ cho Tổng thống Donald Trump.
The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Magoo.
The gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 1 minute.
Nói chung là ông hồi nãy kêu gọi hòa bình, nói là hãy ngưng lại đi,
To the chairman.
đừng có tạo thêm cái sự tức giận cho những người ủng hộ Tổng thống Trump.
Encouraging, inciting a mob that stormed the United States Capitol for the sole purpose of stopping the constitutionally mandated counting of electoral votes cannot go unanswered by this body. He must be impeached. If Congress does not act, if we shrink from our constitutional responsibilities to defend our republic, it will undoubtedly undermine the vision of America as the last best hope of earth.
Ông này thuộc đảng Dân Chủ đang lên nói là Tổng thống Trump đã gây ra những cái chuyện đó thì ông phải giống như là phải bị truất phế.
I will honor my oath. I will vote for impeachment. And I pray that my colleagues must be opposed. With that,
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, we reserve.
Gentleman from Ohio reserves. Gentleman from New York.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Clyburn.
The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding this time. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of the article of impeachment. Last Wednesday, we gathered to follow the Constitution's simple instruction to count the electoral votes that have been tallied by the state.
Người nữa ở South Carolina.
This president refused to accept those results. Instead, he sought to overturn them.
Cái này chưa có xử, cái này họ đang là đứng đây để họ bỏ phiếu.
Today, we must do our constitutional duty once again. While the president failed in his attempt to upend our democracy last Wednesday, events make clear that if we do not hold him accountable and remove him from power, a future attempt could very well be successful. The survival of our democracy depends on defeated candidates accepting their defeats, as has been the case in every president's election since 1864. Our January 6th joint session is a vital part of the transfer of power, not the contest for power. Vice President Gore understood this, accepting and certifying the 2000 election result in which he was defeated. Vice President Biden understood this, accepted and certifying this president's victory in the 2016 election. This president's refusal to participate in the peaceful transfer of power and his role in the inciting of the last week's violence pose an existential threat to our constitutional democracy. This threat must be extinguished immediately. This president must be impeached and convicted, and he must be prevented from ever attempting to seize power again. That are you back?
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Clark.
The gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding time. Madam Speaker, I've heard that President Trump radicalized the group that the rioters who stormed this Capitol, and I would say that we need to look no further than ourselves to find out what happened and to look at history. Americans were frustrated when they learned that the FBI was investigating the Trump campaign. They were frustrated to learn that the Obama administration and the DNC had created this false campaign against the Trump administration. They were frustrated, Madam Speaker, when the inauguration of the president was boycotted by over 40 Democrat members.
Hiện tại là hơn 20.000 lính vệ binh quốc gia là đã gửi tới Washington DC cho ngày chuẩn bị cho ngày nhậm chức của ông Joe Biden.
There They were frustrated when members of this House spoke over and over about impeaching the president days into his administration. And then,
Thì những người lính vệ binh
socialists
quốc
of
gia này
Hollywood
họ nói là
joined
có
their
thể là
allies in
họ
Congress.
sẽ ở thủ đô
Robert De Niro
để giúp đỡ và bảo vệ cho cái ngày nhậm chức nó diễn ra suôn sẻ ở Washington DC.
Kathy Lee Griffin held up a likeness of the president's beheaded head, and nothing was said by my colleagues at that point in time. In fact, one Democrat colleague said that Trump supporters should be harassed wherever they are, in restaurants, on the streets, in supermarkets. During this time, the president was under investigation by a special counsel who found no collusion, no conspiracy with Russia. The president's supporters were harassed. Ajit Pai, the head of the FCC, was called a dirty, sneaky Indian. His children were harassed in school. The press secretary, Kirsten Nelson, the press secretary, Sarah Sanders, was kicked out of a restaurant for being a Trump employee. The DHS secretary, Kirsten Nelson, harassed at her home. Trump donors were publicly...
Gentleman's time has expired. I'm sorry you couldn't hear me. The mic wasn't on. The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from...
Ông vừa xong đó là thuộc người Đảng Cộng Hòa đứng ra bên vịt cho Tổng thống Trump.
The gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 2 minutes.
Smashing windows and beating police officers over the head with fire extinguishers, a bloodthirsty mob attacked the Capitol and invaded this Congress last Wednesday. They erected a gallows and repeatedly chanted,
Ông này thuộc Đảng Dân Chủ.
They stormed Speaker Pelosi's office yelling, "Where's Nancy?" They brandished the Confederate battle flag and occupied the Senate chamber.
Đang lên nói về cái vụ bạo động ngày 6 tháng 1 là ông thấy là nguyên một đám đông để hành hung cảnh sát.
They may have been hunting for Pence and Pelosi to stage their coup, but every one of us in this room right now could have died. As Senator Lindsey Graham said, the mob could have blown the building up. They could have killed us all. And now the far right is calling for return engagement from January 17th to January 20th. They're asking the president to pardon the conspirators in last week's rampage as they prepare for a race war again next week.
Ông đang nói về cái vụ hồi bữa mấy người đó đi vô trong cái tòa nhà này tìm bà Nancy với ông Mike Pence, nhưng mà tất cả những người ở trong cái tòa nhà đó là đều rất là lo sợ và có nguy cơ gặp nguy hiểm. Ủa anh Tom nói ai vậy anh Tom?
Liz Cheney of Wyoming, the elected chair of the Republican conference, wrote, "The president summoned this mob, assembled this mob, and lit the flame of this attack. Everything that followed was his doing. None of this would have happened without the president. The president could have immediately and forcefully intervened to stop the violence. He did not. There has never been a greater betrayal by a president of the United States of his office." Request 10 seconds.
Gentleman from New York.
I yield an additional 10 seconds.
An additional 10 seconds to the gentleman from New York.
Cheney says there's never been a greater betrayal by a president of the United States of his office and his oath to the Constitution. Read Ms. Cheney's statement. Let's come together and impeach the president for this high crime against the republic. We don't have a minute to spare. He is a clear and present danger to the people.
Gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 2 minutes.
Seems to me that impeachment.
Đó là những gì Đảng Dân Chủ họ đang muốn làm đó.
It also seems that President Trump may be most likely to be impeached when he is correct. Before the last presidential impeachment, President Trump rightly pointed out the improper activities of the Biden crime family, and subsequently he's been proven right. And don't think for a moment, Madam Speaker, that we're going to drop that or stop our pursuit for the truth. Before that, we had the Russia hoax,
where you had the president rightly making claims that Hillary Clinton and the DNC were colluding with Russians to disorient our democracy. How right he turned out to be. And then we have the 2020 presidential election, where the president correctly pointed out unconstitutional behavior, voting irregularities, concerns over tabulations, dead people voting, and now impeachment again. When they go low, we kick them. Eric Holder, former Attorney General under Barack Obama, reaching the Capitol was as low could be. We all denounce it. But who is it that they're kicking? The president, who created soaring highs for our economy, rising wages before the pandemic, 400 miles of wall to stop the caravans, who drew down troops in the Middle East and showed empathy for the forgotten men and women of our country. It's why so many people love him so much, and it's why they're kicking all of us. This president has faced unprecedented hatred and resistance from big media, big tech, and big egos, from congressional leaders on both sides of the aisle. Before the rioters tore through that glass, Speaker Pelosi stood at that rostrum and tore through the president's state.
Ông này đứng bên vực cho phía Tổng thống Trump. Nói là Tổng thống Trump đã làm được rất là nhiều thứ. Kinh tế đi lên.
Go through the speaker, please. The gentleman from Ohio.
Madam Speaker, I yield the gentleman additional 40 seconds.
4 seconds or 40 seconds?
Yep, 40 seconds.
45 seconds.
I thank the gentleman. The speaker said to us just moments ago, words matter. But apparently those words don't matter when they're uttered by Democrats. When the gentlelady from Massachusetts calls for unrest in the streets. When the gentlelady from California brazenly brags that she called for people to get in the faces of those who serve and support the president. I denounce political violence from all ends of the spectrum. Make no mistake, the left in America has incited far more political violence than the right. For months, our cities burned, police stations burned, our businesses were shattered, and they said nothing. Or they cheerlead for it, and they fundraised for it, and they allowed it to happen in the greatest country in the world. Now, some have cited the metaphor that the president lit the flame. Well, they lit actual flames, actual fires, and we put them out.
Expired. There will be order in the House. The gentleman from Ohio, do you wish to reserve your time? The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Ông đó đứng lên bên cho bên ông Trump.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Ông nói về mấy cái vụ BLM thì người ta lại không nhắc tới.
January 6th, Donald Trump incited thousands of radicalized terrorists to attack the Capitol to stop a transition of power. Let that sink in. Our president incited our citizens to attack our Capitol. America was not attacked in the past session. This president has inspired future plots. America is still under attack, and that's why Donald Trump must.
Wow, cái tình hình này bỏ phiếu thôi, cái tình hình này từng người một lên nói không biết tới chừng nào mới xong.
But are afraid for their lives if they cross the president. I'm sorry that you're living in fear, but now is the time to summon your courage to guide you. We have all seen the images of the courageous officers.
Chắc khách vô phải đi làm rồi.
You could flee this floor and see your families. That was almost a week ago right now. Officers engaged in hand-to-hand combat.
Chắc là sẽ hẹn gặp lại mọi người lần sau thôi. Nó làm nhận nó làm nhận này.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Anh làm nhận đó đi, em làm nhận này.
The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, we reserve.
Chắc là Mai Vu phải đi làm, sorry mọi người nha. Mọi người có muốn để máy đây không? Hay mình tắt tan, nếu mà để đây á, là không có ai nói chuyện.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Texas, Mr. Castro.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Cái tình hình này không biết tới khi nào mới xong á. Chắc là Mai Vu không có ngồi đây được lâu rồi. Tạm biệt mọi người nha, bye bye nha. Để hả? Vậy để nha, để mọi người coi chút xíu đây, để đây cho mọi người coi nha. Mai Vu không có ở đây, Mai Vu phải đi làm rồi.
breaking the windows
Are you ready, baby?
with weapons, arms, pipe bombs, coming here to harm all of you, to harm the Speaker, to harm the Senate. Let me ask you a question. What do you think they would have done if they had gotten in?
Let me know when you're ready, okay? The last one, okay, baby? The last one when you're ready, okay?
Here, the most dangerous man to ever occupy the Oval Office, in inciting a deadly insurrection.
Khách đang lượn nước sơn.
President impeached. Then what is? All of us must answer that question today. The Constitution requires us to impeach and remove Donald John Trump.
Ủa, để hả?
Madam Speaker, we reserve. Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Dean.
The gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized for 1 minute. Madam Speaker, 1 week ago today, I was trapped in this House chamber.
Đó, bà này đang nói là một tuần trước bà ở phía trên đó.
I feared for colleagues, reporters, and staff. I feared for myself. The attack on the Capitol will never be forgotten. The President and many in this chamber have shamelessly
Bà nói cái ngày 1 tháng 6 đó mọi người vô đây không có thể nào quên được.
despite the warnings of where those lives would lead. And last Wednesday, those lives and dangers found themselves inside this Capitol. This hateful rhetoric is another deadly virus. It is time to remove it from its host. To heal, we need accountability and truth. That begins by acknowledging the president's dangerous lies and their deadly consequences. Removing Donald Trump is the beginning of restoring decency and democracy. What happened last week will not be forgotten.
Ủa,
And
gọi
what
lớn
we
xíu
do
không?
this week will long be remembered. Vote yes on impeachment, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves his time. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's my pleasure to yield 1 minute to the Republican leader, gentleman from California, Mr. McCarthy.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding. Madam Speaker, let me be clear. Last week's violent attack on the Capitol was undemocratic, un-American, and criminal. Violence is never a legitimate form of protest. Freedom of speech and assembly under the Constitution is rooted in nonviolence. Yet the violent mob that descended upon this body was neither peaceful nor democratic. It acted to disrupt Congress's constitutional responsibility. It was also an attack on the people who work in this institution. Members, staff, and the hundreds who work behind the scenes so that we can serve the American people. The greatest statesman in the history of our country understood that the most dangerous threat to freedom is lawlessness. A young lawyer named Abraham Lincoln famously said, "There is no grievance that is a fit object of redress by mob law." Yet for several hours last week, mob law tried to interfere with constitutional law. Some say the riots were caused by Antifa. There is absolutely no evidence of that. And conservatives should be the first to say so. Conservatives also know that the only thing that stops mob violence is to meet it with force rooted in justice and backed by moral courage. And last week we saw mob violence met by courage, sacrifice, and heroism from the brave men and women who protect this institution every day. But for the bravery of the Capitol Police, the destruction and loss could have been much greater. We owe them a tremendous debt of gratitude. The loss of Officer Brian Sedgwick and Officer Howard Livingston is tragic and heartbreaking. We mourn them, remember their lives, and continue to pray for their families and loved ones. The officers of the Capitol Police deserve our eternal thanks. we will never forget the dangers they faced, the determination they showed, or the sacrifices they made. And make no mistake, those who are responsible for Wednesday's chaos will be brought to justice. Which brings me to today's debate. I believe impeaching the president in such a short time frame would be a mistake. No investigations have been completed. No hearings have been held. What's more, the Senate has confirmed that no trial will begin until after President-elect Biden is sworn in. But here is what a vote to impeach would do. A vote to impeach would further divide this nation. A vote to impeach will further fan the flame of partisan division. Most Americans want neither inaction nor retribution. They want durable, bipartisan justice. That path is still available, but is not the path we are on today. That doesn't mean the president is free from fault. The president bears responsibility for Wednesday's attack on Congress by Bob Ryan. He should have immediately denounced the mob when he saw what was unfolding. These facts require immediate action from President Trump. Accept his share of responsibility, quell the brewing unrest, and ensure President-elect Biden is able to successfully begin his term. And the president's immediate action also deserves congressional action, which is why I think a fact-finding commission and a censure resolution would be prudent. Unfortunately, that is not where we are today. Truly, this past week was one of the most difficult for Congress and our nation. Of all the days here, last Wednesday was the worst day I've ever seen in Congress. Our country is deeply hurt. So where do we go from here? After all the violence and chaos of the last week, is it important to remember we are still here to deliver a better future for all Americans. It does not matter if you are liberal, moderate, or conservative. All of us must resist the temptation of further polarization. Instead, we must unite once again as Americans. I understand for some, this call for unity may ring hollow. But times like these are when we must remember who we are as Americans and what we as a nation stand for. And as history shows, unity is not an option, it's a necessity. It is as necessary today as it was at the start of our country. I want us all to think back to how John Adams and the Federalist Party handed power over to Thomas Jefferson and his party after the election of 1800. That election, and indeed that era, was one of the most divisive ever. Partisans used every dirty trick in the book. They demonized each other, dismissed reasonable dissent, and described their opponents as seditious. Sound familiar? The election of 1800 could have destroyed our young nation. But instead of breaking us, it helped us bring us together, thereby preserving the world's last best hope of freedom. After a hard-fought battle over the Electoral College in Congress, Adams conceded, and a peaceful transfer of power, the first in American history, took place. Jefferson, for his part, put aside the division of the era and preached forgiveness. Yes, unity. In his first inaugural address, he famously said, "Every difference of opinion is not a difference in principle." Jefferson and Adams did not end every difference of opinion that existed in America, nor did they try. In a free country as big and diverse as ours, that would be impossible. What they did was more important. They recognized a deeper unity, a unity rooted in the famous proposition both men helped to write. At a critical moment in history, our founders' chose peace, liberty, partnership over tension, division, and partisanship. for the sake of our country, we must make the exact same choice. We have already begun. Last week, despite the lingering shock and amid the windows still broken, we did what all healthy democracies do. We debated and we voted. In this country, we solve our disputes at the ballot box and through debates and votes on the floor of this exact chamber. We did our duty then, and we must do more. The eyes of the nation and the world are upon us. We must seize this opportunity and heal and grow stronger. As leaders, our place in history depends on whether we call on our better angels and refocus our efforts to work directly for the American people. United, we could deliver peace, strength, and prosperity our country's desperately needs. Divided, we will fail. What we saw last week was not the American way. Neither is the continued rhetoric that Joe Biden is not the legitimate president. Let's be clear. Joe Biden will be sworn in as President of the United States in 1 week because he won the election. And the presidency and this Congress will face immediate challenges that must be addressed. I stand ready to assist in that effort with good faith, goodwill, and an open hand. The United States remains exceptional. We remain extraordinary. In the coming weeks and months, we must work together, all of us, to recharge the light of our shining city on the hill. History has shown us a way. History has given us a path. Just as Adams and Jefferson has shown, now is the moment that we should do the exact same. In these trying times, may God continue to bless America. And let's chart a course that history will repeat, but not what's happening today. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Ohio continues to reserve. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Colorado, Ms. DeGette.
The gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, just over a year ago, I stood right there where you're standing today, as we took the solemn step of impeaching the President of the United States for pressuring a foreign leader to take unlawful actions to help him in his re-election. And now, just 1 week ago, almost to the hour, I laid right there on the floor of the gallery above us. I heard gunshots in the Speaker's lobby. I heard the mob pounding on the door. And what they were trying to do, they were all an angry mob incited by the President, trying to stop certification of a legitimate election. It's clear the President learned nothing in the last year. Yesterday, the President said again he did nothing wrong. This man is dangerous. He has defied the Constitution. He's incited sedition, and he must be removed. We all took a pledge on January 3rd to uphold the Constitution. We must honor that oath. We must vote yes on this article of impeachment. I yield back.
Expired. The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from Colorado.
The gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized for 1 minute.
Glory to God. Madam Speaker, I rise today to oppose this impeachment and denounce the recent violence on the Capitol, just as I oppose the previous impeachment and the violence we've all witnessed all summer long across our great country. Make no mistake here, the hypocrisy of the left is on full display. Quote, go to the Hill, get in the face of some Congress people. We've got to fight in Congress, fight in the courts, fight in the streets. Take him behind the gym and beat the hell out of him. Take him, go and take Trump out tonight. Sound familiar? What about the gentlewoman from New York who defended the looting by saying looters just wanted loaves of bread? Well, the last I checked, Best Buy and Teslas and stores of the like do not produce baked goods. Where's the accountability for the left after encouraging and normalizing violence? Rather than actually helping American people in this time, we start impeachment that further divides our country. I call bullcrap. when I hear the Democrats demanding unity. Sadly, they are only unified in hate.
Fired.
Thank you, I yield.
I now yield one distinguished gentlelady from California, Ms. Waters.
The gentlewoman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of impeaching again the worst president in the history of the United States. Since his first day in office, this president has spent 4 years abusing his power, lying, embracing authoritarianism, radicalizing his supporters against democracy. This corruption poisoned the minds of his supporters, inciting them to willingly join with white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and paramilitary extremists in a siege of the United States Capitol building, the very seat of American democracy. The Republican Party is now the Trump Party. And I want you to know that this is a Trump power grab that will not stop. It will not stop with attacking the Capitol and our state legislatures. This president intends to exercise power long after he is out of office. It is reported that the President of the United States watched the invasion from the Oval Office of our Capitol and seemingly enjoyed it. I want you to know we should be concerned that the Republicans will not defend him, and he is capable of starting a civil war. He must be impeached. He must be stopped now.
The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Newhouse.
The gentleman from Washington is recognized for a minute.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Madam Speaker, this is a sad day in our republic. But not as sad or disheartening as the violence we witnessed in the Capitol last Wednesday. We are all responsible. My colleagues are responsible for not condemning rioters this past year like those who barricaded the doors of the Seattle Police Department and attempted to murder the officers inside. Others, including myself, are
mọi người vẫn còn đây luôn hả?
responsible
Cái này nó vẫn còn chạy luôn ta.
for the president misinformed and inflamed a violent mob, tore down the American flag, and brutally beat Capitol Police officers. Madam Speaker, we must all do better. These articles of impeachment are flawed, but I will not use process as an excuse. There is no excuse for President Trump's actions. The President took an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Last week there was a domestic threat at the door of the Capitol. He did nothing to stop it. That is why, with a heavy heart and clear resolve, I will vote yes on these articles of impeachment.
The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve. The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve.
Madam Speaker, could I ask how much time each side has?
The gentleman from Ohio has 36 1/4 minute remaining. And the gentleman from New York has 36 3/4 minutes remaining.
We reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Austin.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Chair, a mob desecrated our Capitol, killed a police officer, and attempted to overthrow our government on the orders of the President of the United States. Immediate impeachment is our duty under a Constitution that compels us to defend against enemies foreign and domestic. As a Marine officer, I defended our democracy from foreign enemies. As a member of Congress, I am solemnly resolved to defend it from domestic ones. With this vote, we strike a blow for moral leadership. I yield back.
Yields back. The gentleman from New York wishes to reserve. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, America is at a crossroads. As the violent riots at the Capitol last week so painfully and shockingly reminded us, the unhinged partisan rhetoric that too often consumes the political dialogue in this country has become toxic and is tearing us apart. If we continue down this path, there's no telling how much damage to our union there may be. Sadly, that's what's happening here today. The majority is
rushing through yet a second impeachment of President Trump, who has but 7 days remaining in office. As prominent constitutional law professor Jonathan Turley has cautioned, today a dangerous precedent is being set that could lead to the normalization of snap impeachments without any hearings or any meaningful discussion or debate. The majority is ramming through this House the most potent tool at our disposal without a single hearing, turning a process that usually takes months into a few short hours. We haven't heard a testimony from a single witness. We haven't heard from any experts on the nature of these charges, nor the damage this effort could inflict on our republic. We didn't even know how this debate would unfold until 9 o'clock this morning. This is truly an unprecedented situation, and one which could cause irrevocable harm to our nation. But, Madam Speaker, it doesn't have to be this way. We don't have to continue down this misguided path. We could instead follow the wisdom provided by none other than Abraham Lincoln during another divisive time in our nation's history and listen to the better angels of our nature. We could choose a more positive, constructive path and vote down this ill-conceived effort. We should tone down the political rhetoric. We should work together to solve the problems that face our nation. We should put aside our differences and find common ground. And we should bring Americans back together, because there's no crisis we can't overcome if we stand united. I yield back.
The gentleman from Ohio yields back. The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Washington, Ms. Vera Butler.
The gentlewoman from Washington is recognized for 1 minute.
My fellow Americans, I rise today to stand against our enemy and to clarify our enemy isn't the president or the president-elect. Fear is our enemy. Fear tells us what we want to hear. It incites anger and violence and fire. But it also haunts us into silence and inaction. What are you afraid of? I'm afraid of what people will say or think. I'm afraid of being devalued. I'm not afraid of losing my job, but I am afraid that my country will fail. I'm afraid patriots of this country have died in vain. I'm afraid my children won't grow up in a free country. I'm afraid injustice will prevail. But truth sets us free from fear. Truth doesn't guarantee bad things won't happen, but it does promise to always prevail in the end. It has no shadows where darkness can hide. With truth comes love, and we could use that right now. My vote to impeach our sitting president is not a fear-based decision. I am not choosing a side, I'm choosing truth. It's the only way to defeat fear.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from New York wishes to reserve his time. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Van Dyne.
The gentlewoman from Texas is yielded 1 minute.
Today, I should be in my district working for my constituents. Instead, I'm back here in Washington because the majority could not resist another made-for-TV impeachment. American workers are losing their jobs and struggling to feed their families. Small businesses are being forced to lay off workers and close their doors. Families are tragically losing loved ones to the coronavirus. Instead of creating or even saving American jobs or negotiating additional COVID relief, we're debating an impeachment that's been preceded by no inquiry, no meaningful debate, and no due process. In 1 week's time, Joe Biden will be the president. The American people need us to rise above the heat of the moment, to focus on their needs and deliver real solutions. Because the majority decided we should debate whether or not to remove a sitting president in just 2 hours, I'll be brief. I oppose this article of impeachment, and I yield back.
The lady yields back. The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. Prideaux.
The gentlewoman from Georgia is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, I teach a civics class where I point out that our democracy is not self-executing. It requires people of good faith and ethics to make it work. The president has repeatedly challenged Georgia's election results, but despite 3 recounts and many investigations, the results are clear. Joe Biden won Georgia. The idea that our election was fraudulent is a lie. Our president used this lie to incite a violent mob to attack the Capitol. I ask my colleagues to act with ethics and good faith, to reject these lies, and in this case to support the article of impeachment. I yield back.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentleman from New York wishes to reserve. The gentleman from Ohio is
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Posey.
The gentleman from Florida has 1 minute.
In our campaigns, we may be adversaries, but usually after the campaign season's over, we have traditionally come together for the good of our nation. Now, more than ever in our lifetimes, we're a divided nation. One of the reasons? The resist movement, which has harassed, harangued, and otherwise denigrated the president since the second he became the nominee. While his sins may be different than yours or mine, they are clearly not treasonous. Let our men and women in blue, who suffered a lot more stress than the members of Congress they protected, have the time they deserve to recuperate, and do the same for millions of Americans who feel they've been disenfranchised. I beseech my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, if you truly want our nation to heal, vote no in this resolution. It reeks of nothing more than revenge and sets a dangerous precedent. May God continue to bless the United States of America.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Brown.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. A week ago, Americans in this chamber lived through one of our darkest days. The Commander-in-Chief incited a mob of insurrectionists to overturn the results of a free and fair election through terror and intimidation. They failed, but this violence took its toll. People died, our country's temple of democracy was vandalized, and our image as the world's leading democracy was shaken. President Trump represents a real threat to our national security, our democratic institutions, and the people of this country. We cannot let Donald Trump, who actively orchestrated sedition, lead our nation's government for another 7 days. We cannot wait until January 20th. Donald Trump must be removed. Thank you, and I yield back to
The
Bell.
gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York continues to reserve. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Texas.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I also want to thank my Democratic colleagues for finally joining Republicans in condemning mob violence after 6 months of refusing to acknowledge it. But I'm really tired of sanctimonious sermons on being a sore loser from some of the same Democrats who opposed accepting results in elections past. Democrats have objected to certifying every Republican victory of the 21st century. In 2000, 2004, and in 2016, Democrats objected every time. When they objected, it was patriotic. But when Republicans do it, we're inciting a mob. We're liars and we're traitors. This is the double standard we should expect under total Democrat control. They've called for unrest in the streets. They've called for harassing cabinet officials. They've objected to certifying election results time and time again. Even the Judiciary Chairman secured clemency for a domestic terrorist who detonated a bomb right here in this building. But we're the extremists? I don't think so. We've been silenced by big tech on social media, by corporate America, and now the other side wants to silence us on the House floor. This is a sad day in America. I urge my colleagues
The
to vote no.
gentleman's time's expired. The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to a new member of the House and a new member of the Judiciary Committee, the distinguished gentlelady from Missouri, Ms. Bush.
The gentlewoman from Missouri is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, St. Louis and I rise in support of the article of impeachment against Donald J. Trump. If we fail to remove a white supremacist president who incited a white supremacist insurrection, it's communities like Missouri's 1st District that suffer the most. The 117th Congress must understand that we have a mandate to legislate in defense of Black lives. The first step in that process is to root out white supremacy, starting with impeaching the white supremacist in chief. Thank you, and I yield back.
And from New York wishes to reserve. The gentleman from Ohio seeks recognition.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Texas, Dr. Jackson.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition to the articles of impeachment. Let me be clear. What happened last Wednesday was a stain on our nation, and the criminals and the rioters responsible should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. It is clear now more than ever that our country needs to come together. And this Congress, needs to lead by example and begin the process of healing the deep division that exists among us as Americans. The articles before us today will not accomplish that. In fact, the sham articles of impeachment will only serve to further fan the flames of unrest and to appease the radical left's appetite for division.
We should be focusing on restoring communities devastated by lockdowns, working on America's vaccine rollout, aiding a bipartisan investigation into these attacks, and ensuring election integrity, not impeaching a president who has promised a peaceful transition and who has less than 7 days left in office. It is time to focus on the unprecedented challenges we face, and it's time to focus on unity. For these reasons, I urge my colleagues to oppose these articles of impeachment, and I yield back my time. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentlelady from New York, Ms. Clark.
The gentlewoman from New York is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, today I rise to support H.R. 24, the article of impeachment against Donald Trump for high crimes and misdemeanors for a second time. Let us be very clear. What took place on January 6, 2021 was an act of domestic terrorism by right-wing, single-facted white supremacists promoted, instigated, and advanced by the man in the White House, Donald Trump. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, the ultimate weakness of violence is that it is a descending spiral, begetting the very thing it sets to destroy. Instead of diminishing evil, it multiplies it.
Time has expired. The gentleman from New York wishes to reserve. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Tippett.
The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My father once said to me, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. In the short time I've served in this body, one thing is clear. This is not a serious place. Last year, we watched as the other side delayed COVID relief for months to inflict maximum pain and sway the outcome of the election. The Speaker said as much. And yet these last 2 days, we have seen just how fast they can move when they want to exact political retribution on their opponents. My friends on the other side now have complete control of both houses of Congress. And in a few days, they will control the entire executive branch as well. Madam Speaker, Joe Biden has talked about unity and healing. Is that what this is today? He's accusing Republican lawmakers of sedition and calling for their expulsion. The plan for healing? Is working with Silicon Valley to digitally disappear those with whom they disagree with the plan for reconciliation? I was among the first to condemn the riots in Madison months ago, and I condemn what happened last week. But where were the swift accusations of incitement and insurrection from the other side last year? Is today's political theater a preview of what the American people can expect from single-party rule? 2 years of double standards and punishing those who voted for someone else? Madam Speaker, I hope Mr. Biden is watching today, and he will rise to the moment and call off this effort to rub salt in the wounds of millions of Americans. It is now time for all of us, Democrats and Republicans alike, to turn down the temperature. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Cleaver.
The gentleman from Missouri is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, it would be an error to suppose that men and women can be courageous every day. It would be unfair to anticipate that I or any member of this body could be a lion every day. No one is expected to be a lion day after day after day. But on this day, lions are required.
The gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
We reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds to the distinguished gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Cohen.
The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you very much. After President Trump was not impeached, Susan Collins said he's learned a pretty big lesson. He was impeached. Then he brought his It Will Be Wild, riotous television show that he produced for one person, individual one. Intelligence reports indicate that the people he said he loves and are special are going to attack this city and attack this Capitol next week. He has not asked them not to do it. He has not told them to stand down. I most fear January 20, because I think he will try to go out with a
The
bang
gentleman's
and
time
take
has
attention
expired.
away from Joe
The
Biden.
gentleman's time has expired, and there will be order in the House. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, statement from the President. I urge that there must be no violence, no lawbreaking, no vandalism of any kind. This is not what I stand for. This is not what America stands for. I call on all Americans to help ease tensions and calm down. Just put out that statement by the President of the United States. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Klein.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the President for his words. Above the entrance to the House of Representatives is a sculpture called the Apotheosis of Democracy. It depicts allegorical peace, dressed in armor and protecting the genius of America. Last week, that peace was tragically torn apart as our U.S. Capitol was invaded for the first time since the War of 1812. A violent mob, including many with the most hostile of intentions, broke past security barriers and unleashed destruction and chaos throughout the Capitol. When it was over, 6 individuals were dead, including 2 Capitol Police officers. I've always supported the rights of citizens to peaceably assemble, but those who breached the Capitol and assaulted and killed Capitol Police should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. If their intent was to stop the constitutional requirement of this body to count electoral votes, they should be charged and prosecuted for insurrection against the government. But we are a nation of laws, not of men, and the legal standard for incitement to violence has not been met. Now, a week since the riots threatened the People's House, and a week until our new president takes office, we are rushing through an impeachment without all of the facts and evidence and without due process. We don't know what kind of information the offenders have, what evidence will come out during their trials, whether it bolsters the majority's claims or the minority's views, whether it implicates other individuals, groups, or other officials in the attack on this hallowed institution. We just don't know. And that's why we must treat the power of impeachment and our responsibility as holders of this power with the seriousness and solemnity it deserves. Let us gather the evidence. Let us hear the judiciary, make an informed decision together. This action will only further fuel the political divide among our citizens and will be detrimental to the long-term effects to efforts to unify our country. I reiterate my call from last night. Let us work together. Both President Trump and President-elect Biden have called for a peaceful transition of power. I humbly beseech my colleagues to work toward this end to unify our country and not go down this dangerous path. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. This time the gentleman from Ohio wishes to reserve. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 30 seconds